And this is the panel you guys wanted to hear, I know. Can you guys hear me? Oh, now you can hear me. Okay, great. Now I can speak quieter. Okay, terrific. I'm gonna get going, and I'm gonna skip the introductory remarks, but we do have a pretty incredible panel. And we're really fortunate to have this panel, so let me just introduce them to you so we can get started. We'll hear from people who we actually want to hear from. Wanda James is the founder and CEO of Simply Pure Dispensary. Along with her husband, Scott Dura, they became the first African Americans legally licensed in America to own a dispensary, a cultivation facility, and an edible company. As a leading advocate in the cannabis industry, Wanda's political and entrepreneurial work on cannabis reform has led her to being named one of the 100 most influential people in cannabis by High Times, one of the 2016 Cannabis Business Executives Most 50 Important Women in Cannabis Industry, and Wanda's been featured in numerous shows, including the BBC, Democracy Now!, The Atlantic, Mike.com, MSNBC, Smile Jamaica, Viceland, The Daily Show, CBS Sunday Morning, and CNBC's Marijuana USA. For those of you who are not familiar with Simply Pure, Simply operates out of Denver. They are widely recognized in the local community as being one of the most popular and highly regarded dispensaries in Colorado. Typically, their products are small batch cannabis products, and they have been tremendously successful. So please welcome Wanda. Also with us is Robert Beasley, who is the CEO of Florida, formerly known as Knox. Robert is a native Floridian. He co-founded the law firm of Litvak, Beasley and Wilson and Ball in 2001. As a consultant, Robert has advised multiple parties to obtain cannabis licenses and create related financing facilities in Florida, Oregon, California, and Washington. Robert has also participated in the design and construction of 5 cannabis cultivation and processing facilities, served as a board of manager of the leading independent cannabis physician clinic group in Florida, and has participated in the legislative and rulemaking process related to Florida's Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act. Does everybody remember when it was called that? In 2016, Robert contributed to the Florida Medical Marijuana Legalization Initiative, also known as Amendment 2. And for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure there aren't many, Fluent, previously called Knox, was one of the very first licensees, one of the original 5 in the state of Florida. And they operate in Florida, Texas, Michigan, Alabama. It is a publicly traded company. And one of the things that I do want to hear from Robert and George about, given that they are both running publicly traded companies, is the challenges for running a company like that in not only this environment, but or a highly regulated business like the cannabis business, but an industry where you have a disconnect between state and federal law, and therefore there are a lot of unique challenges to operating in this space. And let me not leave out George Frenzy, who is the interim CEO of Liberty Health Sciences. George has some interesting news about the company and its direction. If you guys haven't heard that, he'll talk about. But George has held senior management positions at both Fortune 500 companies and startups. He is the chairman of the SCORE Broward and president of Jolismo Consulting and Investments, a member of the board of directors and now the interim CEO of Liberty Health Sciences. He was the division president of Velocity Express, CEO of Advantage Rent Car president and CEO of Far and Wide Travel Corporation. Robert has been very involved in the cannabis space only fairly recently, but he has had a very quick education. For those of you who haven't read, Liberty recently announced a $200 million transaction with Ayer Structures. Liberty has 20 dispensaries currently in the state of Florida, and they trade on the OTC and the Canadian Securities Exchange. So welcome to the panel. Hi, everybody. If you can still hear me, give me a wave. Okay. I think a good place to start with this particular group would be, I want to know how you all found yourselves here. It's really weird. I'm sorry, I'm turning around to look at the passages and not having to sit next to it. But perhaps we could start with Wanda, who's had a pretty incredible journey, and I'd love to fill us in on sort of how you got here, and I also would love for you to tell us a little bit about Simple Pure.
So thank you and welcome everybody, and I hope you are enjoying yourselves in Miami, and a big hello from the Rocky Mountains. We're not quite as warm as you guys are down there. You know, a long time ago, a few years back, I was speaking to the University of Colorado graduating class in political science, and they'd asked the same question. And I think a lot of times, at least when I was younger, and you would hear CEOs or people whose footsteps you would hope to do maybe some of the same things in, talk about their career and how they got here. And so many people, you know, talk about this as this was, you know, a magical, planned out, well thought out, you know, step-by-step operation of how you end up in a space. And I'm here to tell you that none of that is true. So, you know, I don't know how far back you want to talk, but I mean, what I think that people do, or that people should do, is do well in all that you bring to every step along the way, because you'll look back on it one day and find out that each step was the reason why you ended up where you're at. I started as a military officer, then went into corporate America. I thought I was going to be the CEO of a Fortune 100 company one day. I still have that hope, but hopefully it's my company as we move forward. And then in discovering, you know, as time has gone on, I've always been a cannabis connoisseur. I preferred cannabis to alcohol, you know, most of my life. As a college student, I preferred it, not understanding the medicinal or the creative qualities that cannabis brought back in the day. What got us into this cannabis space and has us creating our dispensary operations and cultivation and edible company started out of social justice for us. For me, in meeting my brother, when I was about 35 years old, you know, his first words to me were, you know, hey sis, I just got out of prison. And my heart sank, because when you go to prison, I thought in my world that you'd done something horrible. You must have to go to prison. Well, what we discovered was that my brother, along with 800,000 other people that year, were arrested for simple possession. My brother was arrested for 4 ounces of cannabis and given a 10-year prison sentence. Of that 10-year prison sentence, he spent 4 years picking cotton in Texas. So yeah, they sent an 18-year-old Black kid to pick cotton in Texas to pay off a $160 debt to society. So when we heard that, I had just come off of Barack Obama's National Finance Committee and being the campaign manager for Congressman Jared Polis, who is now Governor Jared Polis here in Colorado. And we wanted to put a Black face on cannabis. We wanted to be able to talk about social equity, social justice, you know, the harms that have been done in the cannabis space. And we figured that we would do it from a standpoint of people that they can't make criminals out of. I mean, I was just in the room with the president. I'm a vet. You know, they can't tell me I'm a criminal. So we started our first dispensary in 2009 before there were any rules, before there was any regulation. And 10 years later, having created this industry or worked with most municipalities, including Florida, which you guys still don't have it quite right yet, but we're hopeful, you know, that, you know, we can change where we are at with who gets licensed to sell cannabis, how cannabis is actually sold, and quite frankly, ending the ridiculous way people view connoisseurs of cannabis and where cannabis should be sold and to whom it should be sold. So yeah, it's been a decade-long path for us. You know, from that time, you know, we have developed into, you know, numerous dispensaries, numerous grow facilities, and God knows we have learned so much about the cannabis plant over this last decade. So yeah, it's been a zigzaggy path to get into where we've gotten. And, you know, there is no one correct way of doing it. There are numerous ways of attacking the cannabis plant. And I'm just proud to have been a part of that development over the last decade.
And we're happy to have you on and appreciate it. And I'm glad you touched upon social justice, because listen, this is typically a networking business group or business conference, and certainly these are important things. And we're here to make money, and I understand that. But a lot of times people sort of cast to the side issues of social justice, issues of compassionate care for patients. And the state of Florida sometimes, I think, falls short of where they need to be in that respect as well. Robert, tell us how you got up here,
Oh, yeah.
Robert?
Yes, I just had to unmute myself for a minute. Well, I kind of came from the opposite direction. I was involved early on. I was a practicing attorney and had held a commercial litigation real estate practice in Pensacola, Florida, and was asked to get involved from the legislative side, both in assisting in the rulemaking process, giving input into it. In Florida in those days, we did not have a lot of models to follow. And a true vertical system, which was that which was being designed here. And so, you know, it was a lot of speculation on how things would work out. And we looked to many different states. What that allowed me to do is go study all of the developing cannabis laws and get a firm understanding as how it's done on a broader scale. And of course, this was 2014 and 15. And so it was many of the states had not yet even considered legalization for medical or recreational. And so having followed through that process, I became kind of a shoe-in for a consultant job and several consultant jobs. And I approached it strictly from my legal job. I worked on bonding issues, finance facility issues. You talk about some of the challenges. Well, the first one that we encountered as new licensees was you had a tremendous amount of capital needed, but no access to banking or your traditional sources. So that involved private coalitions, private money, which involved unique and creative financing, unique and creative corporate structures. So I worked on it strictly from that side in the beginning, and then developed a real love for the operations aspect. Having moved out of Florida, I was then contacted by many groups wanting to develop entire footprints and companies that allowed me a little bit more operations. I'm kind of a frustrated farmer in my personal life. And so the agricultural aspect, and I have a science-based degree, really appealed to me. And so I started expanding from the legal side and more into the operations concept. Now, the first few years, I had to fight the fact that I was a complete and total fraud because I had never touched the stuff. So here I was working in an industry without any street cred. It wasn't until I started really studying what was going on in Colorado and California and went to states where it was recreational legal that I was able to try it and understand the medicinal benefits and so forth. And I'm proud to say I'm now a card holder in the state of Florida. And so I'm getting there. I'm getting there as a consumer. Of course, now in the CEO position, I need to be a consumer to understand some of the nuances of the products. And so that I would say that I come to this business with my weakest component being my cannabis experiential knowledge. But I'm catching up fast, I hope. So that approach has come in from the business and legal side. It's a diverse business with multiple facets. And in the last few years, what I've been focused on is what I call merging the cultures. The artisanal growers are artists. They are also a little bit counterculture, meaning counter corporate culture. And so they're not readily accepting of the structures that have to be in place to run a couple $100 million company. And so you have to take that culture and make them feel comfortable and let them excel, and then actually isolate them from the corporate nature of the business that we're running. And so we have essentially these two components within our structure that have to be compatible and have to be symbiotic, but really actually come from totally different universes. And so right now, my primary role is to be a translator of those two universes and to see if we can sync together and move the company forward.
And that's a very valid point you raised about the merging of two cultures that are somewhat historically, diametrically opposed to one another. Cannabis is a $20 billion industry now, and only on the rise. And so it's only natural that the deals become bigger and more sophisticated, and the players become bigger and more sophisticated. Just sort of as a side note, you look at South Dakota, which legalized both adult use and medical use this year, which is the first time in history that's ever happened in any state. But at the same time, the Bar Association for the state of South Dakota said, well, it's a violation of the rules of professional conduct for you guys to represent folks who are operating in the cannabis space, which raises a huge ethical dilemma for all of us, because how are you going to be able to do these multi-$100 million transactions, but yet you don't have the opportunity to work with competent counsel or competent financial professionals. And George, that sort of transitions well into your background, because again, your background is certainly in management and C-level work, but not in the cannabis industry. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the industry, and I would love for you to bring us up to speed on Liberty's recent transaction with Mayor's Strategy.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Thanks for asking. Actually, I probably got started in the cannabis industry a little bit earlier than everybody. You know, I graduated from Cornell with a degree in agriculture, joined the Peace Corps and went to South America, worked for 3 years in Colombia with the coffee growers. And my particular charge was to work on diversification programs and get farmers that were growing inferior coffee in the lower altitudes and the higher altitudes alongside of a mountain into growing bananas or cacao, chocolate, or moving into livestock like dairy cattle or chickens. So I was out there showing everybody how to do that kind of as an ag extension agent, and they were showing me how cannabis was really the diversification crop that they should be getting into. So I probably learned more about growing cannabis at that point than they did about raising chickens or growing bananas at that point. But I had a plan to go into agribusiness, and as Wanda said, sometimes life moves you in different directions. So I actually ended up in the car rental business and had a pretty decent career in car rental. Worked for Citibank for a number of years, ran a staffing company that had offices across the United States, and then out of Miami ran an international travel company. All of them, interestingly, as it comes together in your career, does it all come to some point where that all gels together well and prepares you for something something unique. And you know, those businesses were all complex businesses, had a lot of government regulations on top of them. Branding was very important, but absolutely paramount was understanding your customer, understanding your customer's needs, and then delivering that flawlessly time after time after time. So because you were searching for that lifetime value of the customer. And so again, I think that background prepared me pretty well. I was asked to join the board of directors of Liberty a few years ago. Sat on the board. Then when we had a CEO vacancy in the fall of last year, I stepped in as the interim CEO, planning on being there just for a few months, which turned out to be a little longer engagement than that. But again, what I've seen in the short term at street level in the business is as particularly in Florida, as the market evolves, as we get or the industry gets its production capabilities up to really starting to match customer demand. It's what is it? You know, let's start paying more attention to the customer. Who is the customer? You know, is it the 25-year-old, the 35-year-old, the 65-year-old, the 75-year-old? What do those different customer segments look for from the industry? And are we evolving so that we're providing that the product lines that they're looking for in the ways that they want to consume, if you will, those products. So I think that's sort of be interesting I'd like to say over the next few years, but we know how dynamic this business is. You know, it's every 15, 16 weeks, you know, we're looking to be coming up with something different. So I think that's the real exciting part of the industry.
Well, speaking of something, Liberty's new partnership with Mayor Strategies, and what your expectations are for the next year.
If you're asking me a question, I can't hear you, John.
George, can you hear me now, George?
No, you seem to be turning away from the mic.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little better.
Okay. What I was hoping you could do is tell us a little bit about your new partnership with Mayor Strategies and what you expect for Liberty over the next year or two.
Sure. Yeah, I think everybody's aware of the acquisition by by air. We have the shareholder vote for that on February 23rd. We're all looking forward to that. What I think the major benefit from the acquisition by air is really the financial support that they bring. As we know, the market down here is growing. We have new customers, 4% new customers coming in every month. Over the last 12 months, the customer base grew 50%. And if you look at where, with the 310 or so dispensaries that we have, the industry is already established in the state. We have some pretty decent coverage, but there's still lots of underserved portions of the state where it's difficult for customers to access the medical marijuana supplies or products that we have to offer. So I think as we see some of the MSOs moving into Florida, what that'll portend for the industry as a whole is being able to expand at a faster rate and provide better coverage throughout the state. And then the other thing I think that we'll all benefit from is as we look to the move to rec on air and a number of the other multi-state operators have some good experience and have people that have had some serious experience in moving from a medical marijuana state only into a rec state, and being able to tie into that knowledge base rather than to run it alone and try to figure it out without making missteps. I think will be a big value there. That intellectual knowledge, if you will, of how you move with as few errors as possible from a medical marijuana into a recreational state too.
Sure. Well, yeah. Hopefully, their background and experience in Massachusetts and Nevada will be tremendously helpful for you guys. We're living in a world where a recent Gallup poll, the results of which were that over 70% of the population of this country is in favor of the decriminalization of cannabis or legalization of adult use cannabis, which is multiples higher than just slightly a few years earlier. Notwithstanding that we have a new administration, and hopefully things are headed in the right direction, we still live in a country, as opposed to our neighbors to the north, where you guys are all operating perfectly legally in a highly regulated environment on the state side, but you still have to deal with the challenges of cannabis being a Schedule I controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act, which raise a lot of questions and problems and predicaments for operators, both in terms of IRS rules, which don't allow you to take standard deductions, to the inability to transport products across state lines, to packaging and labeling requirements that vary from state to state in which you operate. So I would love to hear from the three of you, and I'm sure the audience would as well, about the sort of unique challenges that you all have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's certainly hard enough to be the CEO, particularly of a public company, to begin with, but to operate in an environment where it's hard to eke out a fair living because of prohibitive IRS rules and other regulatory problems, notwithstanding, not to mention the fear of potential criminal prosecution. And at the same time, you're trying to generate a profit. We're also working towards, again, compassionate care for patients in medical states, social justice for states, for everywhere. What do you guys have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? I guess we'll start with Wanda because we'll keep it in the same order. But I'd love to know sort of the unique issues and challenges that present themselves to you guys.
So it's the same for every cannabis company across the nation. 280E taxes us anywhere between 40 and 80% of income with little to no deductions. So we don't get to write off our computers. We don't get to write off the desk that we bought. I mean, it really is ridiculous. 280E, for those of you that are not aware, is a tax violation or a tax penalty that is given to folks that are basically drug lords. It was actually started in South Florida during the 80s when cocaine was running rampant. And it basically allowed every time that they busted a cocaine dealer to be able to go in and take 80% of all that they had, because clearly they had not paid taxes on it and they were going to be penalized for that. We have argued unsuccessfully that Pablo Escobar was not registered with the Secretary of State, nor was there a sign above his stores that says buy cocaine here. So there is no reason for cannabis to be taxed in the same way that the drug lords in the 1980s were. And we're getting to that point. Given the fact that California is now a recreational state, 11 other states, including Illinois, so highly populous states are now moving forward. New York, New Jersey are about to follow suit very soon. And, you know, the floodgates are open. The idea that you folks are still dealing with medical down in Florida is, you know, an interesting dichotomy. And what people don't like to hear me say, medical marijuana is, in terms of dispensaries selling medical marijuana products, is a losing proposition. Medical marijuana has not worked in any state in which it's been in. And what medical marijuana has been designed to do, there is definitely medicinal cannabis, and medicinal cannabis helps people with a variety of issues, from anxiety to epilepsy to cancer. Yes, absolutely, 100%. And I also believe too that even a lot of folks that, you know, relax recreationally at the end of the night, my husband and I choose to do that with a joint and not a martini, whichever one you choose is fine. If you're over 21, I'm not demonizing anything. But I mean, there is lots of things that come out of cannabis from medicinal soothing and medicinal help. But what we have seen is there's going to be a definitive divide between what happens medicinally and what happens recreationally. And medicinally, when you start to talk about you need CBD oil for your child's epilepsy, this is not the CBD oil that you're buying at your local gas station or at Walgreens. And I need to be very clear about that, because it is a very different formula, and that formula is developed with doctors, and the cannabis and how it's extracted is definitively different, or the CBD of how it's extracted is definitively different from folks that are looking to alleviate those types of medical issues and help with pain and different things. Yes, topicals work wonderfully. My husband uses them for his back all the time. You know, there is definitely, you know, THC with the combination of CBD that absolutely definitively helps. But let's be very clear. Once you guys get to the idea and open up the doors on recreational sales will trump medicinal sales at the dispensary level by a tremendous amount. Yes, Pfizer, Baxter, humana will make billions and billions and billions of dollars. But for the most part, not in all cases, the folks who are currently growing and opening dispensaries now will not be offering that same type of medicinal cannabis. It will be very different. There may be supplements in a dispensary. There may be vitamin type additives in a dispensary. Absolutely, with all of the different pieces that cannabis has, CBG, CBN, we'll discover how all of those different aspects of cannabis, along with THC, is able to help the human condition in many ways. But let's be very clear. Recreational cannabis is where the dollars will be made. We started off as medicinal marijuana. My husband used to cook for Namaste Hospice. It was the first hospice in the country that allowed cannabis for its end of life patients. So we come out of medicinal backgrounds. We definitely get, you know, food in itself is healing. So food and cannabis together is definitely a healing nature. So I need us all to hear me say that, but understanding that the walls that we have put up in states where folks just want to sell medicinal cannabis is nothing like what happens once everybody over the age of 21 is allowed to recreate and enjoy cannabis in the different forms in which we do it. And that is everywhere from, you know, smoking flower to vaping and to concentrates. You know, we need to get over the idea that a 90% concentrate is perfectly fine. and it does not, have anything to do or says anything positive or negative about the user. It just means that they are, experimenting with a higher form of THC and enjoying dabbing, which quite frankly is a cleaner form of being able to ingest cannabis because it removes most of the plant matter and keeps your lungs cleaner. And for people that are looking for a higher faster effect of THC, that is a fine option. So are what we're calling microdosing now, edibles that have 2.5 to 5 milligrams of THC versus what we here in Colorado and most most recreational states have said a serving is 10 milligrams of THC. So because people adjust more, and as you will find out, as adults tend to become very comfortable with cannabis, as we are here in Colorado. We're not strange about it. We don't make judgments on people's use of cannabis, but we find that some folks, will enjoy a 50 milligram candy bar or a half of 100 milligram candy bar. And some folks really just want a 2.5 milligram piece of chocolate because that's what they need to enjoy their day and to be able to recreate or relax in the way that they want to. Acceptance is where we need to get. The other place that we need to get to is minority ownership. And that is a real issue for a state such as Florida. And the larger companies are going to have to understand that if they are not open to having inclusivity in their board of directors, in their C-suites, or are showing a path for entry-level people to become involved in cannabis, and quite frankly, in their ownership as well, they will find that they will have a very difficult time in states that have high populations of people of color, such as the Eastern Seaboard, Florida, and other places. It is a huge issue that we are seeing happen in Illinois and California, and it will continue with Florida.
Thank you, Mona. And I agree, there's certainly a lesson to be learned from more mature markets like Colorado that have been through this, that understand these issues, that understand the distinction between vertical and horizontal integration and why vertical may not work. Some may disagree. And medical versus adult use or recreational marijuana. And so we certainly take a lesson out of your playbook. And Robert and George, Florida is obviously a fairly new state. We're still just a medical state. We'll talk a minute about what we can expect the next couple of years down the road. But you guys are running companies, public companies, where it is difficult to get a bank account, where you cannot take credit cards from customers, where you couldn't file for bankruptcy protection if, in fact, you needed to, and hopefully you won't ever. But tell us a little bit about life running a company like this as opposed to, and I know George, for example, you've been in the rental car business for many years. And tell us a little bit, both regulated industries, but what are the unique issues that you all face on a day-to-day basis that you certainly never anticipated back in your days, practicing law or running, working for some other medical companies that you got to deal with on a day-to-day basis that you would have perhaps not even thought of? I guess we'd start with Robert.
Sure. So there's a few of the more obvious challenges. 280E was just mentioned, and obviously 280E causes increased tax amount. So we're suffering somewhere around 60% with when you exclude the deductions that are normally available to other companies. But the 280E implication goes a little further that into your business practices and some of the things I'm discovering. For instance, any types of agreements which are based on revenue principles, whether it be a commercial lease, which sometimes has some type of revenue-based bonus in it. When you base it on revenues, you don't account for the fact that you're paying 60% tax. So you end up the revenue-based agreements, which are traditional in other industries, whether it be through a management company, some type of association on products. Right now, there are a tremendous amount of companies out west that want to come into Florida. They want their product names in the shelves, and they want to bring you their intellectual property and their formulations, but they want their name out there. Well, in exchange for that, they need some kind of revenue-based commission. All of those type concepts that are traditional in other industries are impaired by the fact that if we base a commission based on gross revenues, our tax implications are so egregious that it impacts those relationships. So there's one that's kind of laying beneath in how we do business. The other one, which you mentioned, but is tremendous when you're a multi-state operator, is the ability to move materials and inventory and even associated materials between states. In any other operation where you would have 5 or 6 states, you would achieve economies by moving your seed inventory from one space to the other, taking some clone cuts from one area to the other, and so forth, all of which is illegal. And so you have to run these distinct segregated bins. Each state has to be its own separate entity, even though you are one combined company. And that's very inefficient, and it causes a tremendous amount of cost. The last one that recently I've been working on that's most interesting to me, and it's just you constantly turn over these little issues. One is that we are first and foremost an agricultural company, and Florida is filled with agricultural companies. And I think that it's acknowledged in this country presently that a lot of the agricultural labor is done through these federal immigrant programs, these legal programs where workers come over, migrant workers come over, and they kind of tour the country and work the farm season, so to speak. It provides a lot of dependable, high quality labor at a decent cost. It appears we cannot tap into those programs because they're federal programs. So we're the only agricultural company in America that cannot use this source of high quality, dependable labor. And quite frankly, some of our agricultural tasking is just as tedious as anything else. The trimming and manicuring and drying processes, while they seem exciting the first week, after a while they get tedious and very difficult. And we're just not able to access a source of labor to sufficiently and competently handle this at scale. And it's all about scale. So there's another little hidden issue that just popped up that is interesting to us. Of course, we can't bank traditionally. We can't take credit facilities traditionally, and we can't access banking money. We have to access private money, which is always more expensive. So there's just a few overviews of how the issues of it being federally illegal and federally criminal actually implicate our business practices.
Well, thank you. And in addition to, like you said, labor issues, tax issues, and perhaps George can touch upon this. You started to talk about
Maybe
financing. And
what I could add.
financing is something that has not been.
To me, what's interesting about the business and kind of gets you hopping out of bed in the morning, excited, is the vertical integration that obviously we deal with, that Robert referred to. You just have to be good at so many things, from the cultivation to the processing to the manufacturing to the packaging to the distribution to the retail sales to your customer service, and that's pretty cool in an environment where the demand continues to exceed the supply. So we're trying to scale all of that while being very good at it, and it's a challenging situation. And so you have to have the right team of managers in place that are able to keep things running today while they're looking over the horizon as to what's coming tomorrow and where we can move the industry and where we can move individual companies too. So, and then doing that while you have all the different regulations. So you're not allowed to make any missteps along the way. If you mislabel something in the process, that can be $250,000 mistake in a day that takes you, 4 or 5 weeks to recover, repackage, relabel, whatever it is. So, and that's still in an environment where the state's fairly supportive of what we do. Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, all the T's we have to cross and the I's we have to dot. It's actually within a fairly supportive environment, but there's still a lot of T's to cross and I's to dot while you're racing down the road at 90 miles an hour type of thing. So so I think that's all good things. It's an industry that's moving forward. There's it's not like we have these millstones around our neck and we can't and we're hobbled with everything we try to do. It's a forward-looking industry and a state that's forward-looking at the moment. So we have those day-to-day challenges. I think they're good challenges for us and for our teams and for our stakeholders.
Well, I agree with you. It's a forward-moving industry. I definitely think that the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. And since we're fortunate enough to have 3 of you sitting on a panel together, I'm going to pick your brain and ask you guys for your predictions, your handicapping on what do you expect over the next 2 years. We have a new administration. We have a new makeup of the Senate on a federal front. I'm curious to know what you guys see coming down the pipe We've heard about the MORE Act, we've heard about the States Act, we've heard about the Safe Banking Act. What do you three see coming down the pipe, both on the state and federal level? And then I want to have an opportunity to have the audience ask you guys some questions before we break up.
I had the great opportunity of serving on Kamala Harris' National Finance Committee when she was running for president. So we had the chance to host her here in Colorado and got the chance to meet her and have a number of good conversations about where she would have taken cannabis should she have been president. I've had a lot of conversations, obviously, with numerous members of Congress. I'm part of Barbara's brigade, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who takes numerous cannabis professionals around the country to speak to folks as to what needs to have happen to be able to make legalization a thing. Because at the end of the day, legalization is what's going to allow for banking and for loans and for the SBA to give back, which, you know, when you look at being a minority business owner, and my husband and I have been business owners now for well over 25 years and entrepreneurs, you always find yourself at a less than place because, you know, it's hard for me to call up mom and dad and be like, hey, y'all, I need $5 million to start my business, you know? So when you don't have the ability to be able to do that, going to the bank would make sense, because you would think that once you got licensed, which a lot of social equity applicants, you know, have been able to do, you could take that license and go to a bank and be like, I have the opportunity to open up a multi-million-dollar business. I just need a loan to be able to get that moving forward. Right now, you have to be at the mercy of private equity, which means you have to be able to show mostly white men why they should invest in a minority business. And we all know that that's a very difficult thing to do in the best of circumstances, much less selling a Schedule I illegal drug. So legalization will change the face of what cannabis looks like. I believe that within the next 2 years, we will see federal legalization. I personally believe that we may see it this year. You know, it all depends on what the Republican side of the House wants to do. But, you know, we're excited. And, you know, I believe somebody mentioned the level of Americans that now support cannabis legalization is the highest it's ever been. It's well over mid-60s across the board. Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, everybody is moving forward for it. So from the conversations that I've had with our elected officials and those who are serving in the White House right now, I'm pretty sure that we're going to see big movement happen shortly, and especially with California and the billions that it's going to put into the market. Colorado hit $2 billion worth of sales as of last November. So you can't just have that kind of money, you know, floating around in, you know, suspicious bank accounts, you know, Joe's Auto Body and all those types of things. So it will be very soon that we'll see banking happen. And for banking to happen, it means that the federal government has to pull out a prohibition.
I certainly hope you're right, and I tend to agree with you. Robert, George, what do you think's coming first? Adult use in Florida or rescheduling or descheduling on the federal side?
So, and that's kind of the wordplay that we've been engaging in, which is legalization versus decriminalization. I believe that if we could deschedule one THC derivatives and cannabis derivatives all by itself, which is not necessarily a legalization move, it really would represent a statement from the federal side of leaving this to the states. I think the state programs now are so far out in front and they're so robust that there really probably is not a legal federal oversight scenario that's going to be developed. It would take a whole new agency set of assignment rules, and this would take years to even develop out. The better pathway, and it seems to be the pathway that everyone's agreeing with, is deschedule it as off of Schedule I, which then gets us into two different scenarios. One, the banking opens up, and then also the 280E that we've been talking about in this. So I don't know that it has to be such a big political push. I think just taking it off of Schedule I and decriminalizing would be sufficient. And then as far as whether that happens before Florida goes recreational, I think it probably does. I think the Biden administration push, and at least our stock has revealed confidence by most investors that decriminalization, at least that first step, happens pretty quickly. I'm not as tied in as Wanda is to the current administration, but it just makes sense. It's an easy step. It's not an overly political step, meaning a number of votes needed. In fact, there may be no votes needed for it. And it could be, and it would be big as far as symbolic support. So I think that happens first. Recreational in Florida is going to take a referendum or some type of legislative initiative that there might not be the support for right now. We still have a Republican governor. So I think we're looking more towards a governor change in the next election, which then would follow possibly a support for a recreational move. And so now we're looking at 2022, 24, which I think will be behind federal decriminalization.
Sure, I know we have a couple of.
I think we got a mini hurricane starting outside here.
Oh, is it getting that outside?
I
We have a couple of ballots. What do you think about the prospects that will build use by 2022 in Florida? And then I'm going to try to take a couple of quick questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can hear you. We're in a room where there's rain pounding on the wall here, and it's
Okay. You know, we're taking baby steps. This is the first event in person since COVID, so and I didn't even get to ask these guys about what they had to deal with COVID-related issues, delivery. I'm sure it's impacted their businesses dramatically. But let's take maybe 2-3 questions from you guys before we wrap it up, because I know people are waiting. Anybody have anything that they would like to ask? Sure. You guys probably didn't hear the question, right? So Tim's question was basically, and correct me if I'm paraphrasing, but you're still dealing with big companies, you're dealing with public companies. How does the little guy, and particularly minorities and people who don't have access typically to capital that they would need to start a business, particularly in Florida, what steps need to be taken to go in that direction towards social equity, towards the little guy or woman getting the financing that they just haven't been able to get in this business?
So that's the billion-dollar question, and it's why social equity.
Billion-dollar question.
I mean, and that's why social equity has failed in almost every state that we have seen it work in. I'll be honest, what we are going to see and what the push is going to be, a lot of these companies are going to be held in the public square. If a company is all, white and male owned, and its C-suite looks that way, and its board of directors looks that way, and their ownership capabilities looks that way, I think that those companies are going to have a hard time competing. There are definitely some larger organizations out there right now that are minority run, such as, Viola, run by Al Harrington, who's doing a tremendous, job. Senyu Ajabaji, he's got, 4 different dispensaries. He's definitely a multi-state operator that's operating. And Simply Pure is in the middle right now of franchising. We've only been able to use that word franchising very recently. Our concept, not our concept, our dispensary that has been around for 10 years. And our hope with that is that we're going to be able to invest in more minority ownership, minority women and vets ownership as we move forward. And, we're going to expect the large MSOs to invest in this process. And once again, and I hope that folks understand that the reason why minority investment and minority ownership in cannabis is important, and you don't see it a lot in other industries, it's because of the rate of which minorities went to jail for this plant and then were subsequently kicked out of being a part of first mover advantage. Let's be real. The reason why my husband and I have been in this for 10 years and why we are been able to be as big and as expansive as we're getting is because we had first mover advantage. Our first dispensary cost us about $250,000, which was just, you know, how we wanted to decorate it, which was where most of that money went to, because we didn't see the same type of regulatory interference and cost to be able to grow. Scaling your product is important. My heart breaks when I hear people talk about getting one dispensary and they think that that's going to create generational wealth. It won't. One dispensary in the world of big dispensaries is very difficult. And it can happen, but it is a very difficult process when somebody in your state owns 180 dispensaries, because they're going to set the price of what things are going to get sold for. So yeah, we're in for a long time battle. This is like every other industry, but I do believe that the focus on minority ownership is going to definitely permeate. And I think that there are going to be a lot of lessons learned over the next few years of how that process is going to lay out.
Thank you, Mark. We do have a long road to go for sure. You know, I just found out we have the benefit of having State Representative Rico here with us in the room, who's agreed to step up and perhaps answer some questions or give his thoughts and outlook on what we could expect in Florida over the next year or two. So thank you. It's good to have you here.
I'll sit away, so now.
Okay, well, that's okay. You can hear me, yes.
I'll take my next one.
And Robert and George, if you guys care to come over, if it's not, I'm sitting outside, you guys want to come over and join us in here, that would be terrific if you can. If not, no worries.
So we're all okay? You got sound?
So welcome. Thank you. So what's your predictions?
All right.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I got a chance to be sitting here for a little bit, so it seems a little bit more optimistic than the reality.
Okay.
So I spend, from now until May, I spend a majority of my time in Tallahassee. I can tell you that. It's more than just a building. I'm a member of a 120 member legislative body called the Florida House of Representatives. It is 2 seats away from being super majority Republican. There he is.
Yeah.
So it's a real challenge. And the current Speaker of the House, who I call him a friend, but I would not describe him as a friend to the cannabis industry. He has been very vocal. He has made any noise about it regarding his opposition to medical marijuana and to the recreational marijuana. There are a handful of bills supported from both Republicans and Democrats. Republicans in the Senate and Democrats in the House have filed both of the bills regarding the decriminalization of recreational marijuana. Those bills are what is described as death on fire. Meaning they will never get a hearing within the next 2 years under the current leadership of the Florida House of Representatives. So it won't even be an issue to get through the.
Well, that raises an interesting issue then, because then you're faced with what we had in 2016, where you're going to have ballot initiatives, and then the legislature will lose control over how to shape the program. So wouldn't it be wiser, and I know which is required, but I think it would be wiser to be able to, for example, set up and regulate an adult use program the way that makes sense to the legislature, rather than have the voters come in and trump that essentially.
So
I'll take it back.
So just so everybody knows, I'm the representative from Miami Beach, downtown Miami, Little Havana, North Bay Village. I'm in my second term. I am a member of the Democratic Party, but some Republicans love what I do because I'm all over the place. But on issues like this, I'm 100% with you. I filed a bill for a full rec program 2 years ago, knowing that we get up on file, because candidly, we have to file that bill every year. Otherwise, we're essentially conceding, and we can't concede so far. The answer to your question is yes. It makes more sense to have a robust piece of legislation like some states have done, but the reality is no one's going to file it, no one's going to move it, and there are some Republicans, say a handful in the House, a handful in the Senate, who recognize the fact that it is not politically advantageous for the Republican Party to have a recreational marijuana ballot measure on the same ballot with a bunch of people running for office. Because traditionally, it does drive out Democratic voters, and it could impact not just local elections, but statewide elections. So let's say it's 2022. Let's say one of the ballot measures that's kind of jammed up the court system makes it on the 2022 ballot in November of 22. You're talking about the governor's race. You're talking about Rubio's reelection. You're talking about every state house and half of the state senate races in Florida all being on the same ballot in November of 2022. The last thing you want to do is have things on the ballot that are driving out Democratic voters where they wouldn't necessarily come out, or they weren't necessarily going to vote for Republicans. So yes, the politics of it do not make sense to have it on the ballot, but there is a zeal in Tallahassee, and I'm going to raise your hand if you've ever been to Tallahassee. It ain't like Miami. It's definitely not like Miami. Right? As soon as you clear Palm Beach, stay in Orlando, we're in South Georgia. And it's a different world, it's a different nomenclature, it's a different culture. I'm a tattooed flip-flop wearing South Beach guy, right? So they don't know what to do with me up there. And there's a few of us. But it's a completely different world. It's not a throwdown in this world. It's anti-cannabis. I mean, look at what they do with medical marijuana. It passes in 2016, and they spent years trying to undermine it. Every year we're playing defense trying to make sure that there's no THC caps. Every year we're playing defense on all these different issues, trying to undermine the will of the voters from 5 years ago. So it's a real challenge. We're under attack all the time. I mean, I filed a bill this year to legalize psilocybin. So I'm pushing for mushroom legalization here in Florida, and I know it's yet upon file, but it is a conversation that we need to have. Now that is actually more legitimate. That's more legitimate medicinal conversation for the folks in Tallahassee than even cannabis. But it's going to take us a couple of years to have that conversation where meaningful legislation will exist.
It's a shame because, like you said, it's really counterproductive because it's coming anyway. You have a situation where every state has dealt with a major slump hemorrhage over the last year because of COVID. Why not regulate the property, tax it, bring some money into the state? The reality is that a major goal of the state of Florida is to keep cannabis out of the hands of children and people who want to use medicine, and I understand that. And I also understand this father of these children, they're just going to the illicit market to get it. So, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's a shame to see these companies spending millions of dollars on lobbyists, and really what we're hearing is nothing's going to get done. Not on the legislative side.
Not on the legislative side, just so everybody knows, in the 2020 elections, with the success that the Democratic Party had in the presidential race, that did not reflect in Florida. Significantly less people voted for Joe Biden than they did for Hillary 4 years prior. We lost 5 seats in the Florida House, and we lost 1 seat in the Florida Senate. So the pendulum unfortunately swung the wrong way last year, and that hurts this industry. So whether you describe yourself as an independent, as a Democrat, as a Republican, I can tell you in Florida, I can only name 2 Republicans, 1 in the Senate, 1 in the House, who are supportive of our industry. So if this is your one issue, I can't tell you how to vote, but I can tell you that what happened last year did not help anybody in this room. What happened with the election?
Oh, in the election.
We thought we were going to gain seats, which would have given us a lot more leverage in these type of issues, whether it be decrim. I did file another bill this year that would cap sentencing. I don't know, that's very frustrating. So I did file some bills in the decrim space, and I had to rank minority member for criminal justice. So we're hoping to move the needle a little bit in criminal space. But when it comes to recreational marijuana, protecting folks who are current patients, I'm a patient as well, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. It just got more difficult a few months ago during the elections.
Well, listen, I know we're running late, but I really appreciate you taking the time to step up here. If we maybe have a quick question or two, or for the panel, otherwise I know I got to wrap up and move on. But anybody, something real quick? Let me begin by thanking Wanda, George, and Robert for their time and for being with us today. I know that it was a bit difficult with everybody, and next year, I'm very, very optimistic that we're always sitting in the same room with one another, and it's going to be a much more smooth process. So thank you very, very much.